In December of 1872, a ship was found drifting in the Atlantic Ocean. Its sails were damaged. Its deck was quiet. Its cabins were empty, and there was no one on board. No captain, no crew, no passengers, no bodies. The ship had not sunk. It had not burned. It had not been destroyed in battle, and it had not been stripped by pirates. There was food, there was water, there was cargo, there were personal belongings still left behind. But every person who had been traveling on that ship had vanished. The ship was called the Mary Celeste, and more than 150 years later, it is still remembered as one of the most mysterious ghost ships in history. But the strangest thing about the Mary Celeste is not simply that people disappeared. The strangest thing is that the ship was found in a condition that made the disappearance even harder to explain. It was still floating. It was still recognizable. And from a distance, it looked like a vessel that should have had people on board. But when sailors came closer, they noticed something was wrong. The ship was moving strangely. Its sails were set in an unusual way. There was no one visible on deck, and when the other ship tried to signal it, no one answered. The vessel that discovered the Mary Celeste was called the Dei Gratia. Its crew saw the empty ship drifting near the Azores in the eastern Atlantic. At first, they may not have understood what they were looking at. Ships at sea could be damaged. They could lose control. They could suffer storms. They could fall behind schedule. But a ship sailing with no one on board was something else entirely. A boarding party was sent across the water, and when the men climbed onto the Mary Celeste, they found a scene that would become legendary. The ship was empty, not abandoned in a chaotic massacre, not destroyed by fire, not covered in blood, not torn apart by violence, just empty. The people were gone. The captain was gone. His wife was gone. His young daughter was gone. The crew was gone. 10 people had sailed aboard the Mary Celeste. None of them were ever seen again. That alone would have made the story famous. But then the details began to make it even stranger. The cargo was still there. The Mary Celeste had been carrying industrial alcohol across the Atlantic, bound for Genoa, Italy. Most of that cargo was intact. The ship's supplies were still on board. There was food and water. There were belongings in the cabins. This did not look like an ordinary robbery. If pirates had attacked, why leave valuable cargo? If the crew had mutinied, why leave the ship behind? If disaster had struck, why was the ship still floating? And then came one of the most important clues. The lifeboat was missing. That meant the people on board may have left the Mary Celeste voluntarily. They may have climbed into the small boat and abandoned the larger ship. But that creates an even deeper mystery. Why would anyone abandon a ship that was still afloat? A lifeboat in the open Atlantic was far more dangerous than a large vessel. A captain would not normally leave a seaworthy ship unless he believed something terrible was about to happen. So what did Captain Benjamin Briggs think was happening? That question is the heart of the Mary Celeste mystery. Benjamin Briggs was not known as a reckless man. He was an experienced captain. He was respected. He was traveling with his wife and their young daughter. This was not just another voyage for a careless crew. This was a family crossing. The Mary Celeste had left New York in November of 1872. Its destination was Genoa, On board were Captain Briggs, his wife Sarah, their daughter Sophia, and the crew. The voyage should have been difficult, but not impossible. Ships crossed the Atlantic all the time, but somewhere along the way, something happened. Something serious enough that everyone left the ship. And whatever happened, it left behind almost no clear evidence. There were signs of disorder. Some areas of the ship were wet. Some sails were damaged. Some equipment was out of place. There was water in the hold, but not enough evidence to explain a full evacuation. There was no obvious sign of a violent struggle. No bodies. No burned wreckage. No enemy ship. No final message explaining the decision. It was as if the people had stepped off the ship and disappeared into the ocean. Over time, the Mary Celeste became a perfect mystery, and perfect mysteries attract theories. The first explanations were dark. Some suspected piracy. Maybe another crew had attacked the ship, killed everyone, and left. But that explanation was weak. The cargo was still there. The personal belongings had not been looted. There was no clear evidence of violence. Pirates usually wanted something. The Mary Celeste looked less like a robbery and more like a sudden escape. Others suspected mutiny. Maybe the crew turned against the captain. Maybe they killed him and his family. Maybe they fled in the lifeboat. But again, the evidence did not support a clean answer. If the crew had taken control, why abandon the ship? Why leave the cargo? Why vanish without a trace? Then there was the idea of insurance fraud. Maybe the mystery was staged. Maybe the ship was abandoned on purpose. But that theory also had problems. 10 people disappeared forever. No one came forward. No one was found living under another name. No secret prophet explained the loss. The simplest dramatic explanations did not fit the quiet details, so investigators and historians looked for something more realistic. Maybe the crew believed the ship was sinking. There was water in the hold, and one of the ship's pumps had problems. If Captain Briggs thought the Mary Celeste was taking on more water than it really was, he may have panicked. Not in a foolish way, but in a human way. Imagine being at sea. Your ship is wet. The weather has been rough. Your instruments may not be giving you confidence. The pump is not working properly. You cannot tell exactly how much danger you are in, and you have your wife and child on board. A captain does not need absolute proof of disaster. Sometimes he only needs fear that disaster is coming. If Briggs believed the ship was about to sink, he may have ordered everyone into the lifeboat. But there is still a problem. The Mary Celeste did not sink. It kept sailing, empty. Another theory involves the cargo. The ship was carrying barrels of industrial alcohol. Alcohol can release vapor. If the crew smelled fumes, heard rumbling, or feared an explosion, they may have believed the ship was about to blow apart. This theory has remained one of the most discussed possibilities. Perhaps the captain ordered everyone into the lifeboat temporarily. Maybe they planned to keep the lifeboat attached to the ship by a rope, waiting until the danger passed. Then maybe the rope broke, or was cut, or came loose, or the wind changed. The Mary Celeste could have moved away faster than the small boat could follow. The ship would continue drifting. The people in the lifeboat would be left behind in the open Atlantic. No shelter, no strong protection, no way back. That theory is terrifying because it does not require monsters, pirates, or conspiracies, only fear, bad information, a dangerous sea, and one decision made at the wrong moment. But even this theory is not perfect. If there had been an explosion, why was there no major fire damage? If the fumes were that dangerous, why was the ship still mostly intact? If the crew only planned a temporary evacuation, why did they not secure themselves better? The Mary Celeste gives just enough evidence to build a theory. Then it gives just enough doubt to break it. Another possibility involves weather, a sudden storm, a waterspout, a violent sea, a wave that damaged the ship and terrified the crew. Perhaps they thought the vessel was doomed. Perhaps they saw land closer than it really was. Perhaps they believed they could survive in the lifeboat. But the ocean does not forgive mistakes. If they left the Mary Celeste, even for reasons that seemed logical in the moment, the Atlantic may have sealed their fate. That is the painful part of this mystery. The answer may not be dramatic. It may not involve murder. It may not involve a secret code. It may not involve a supernatural ghost ship. It may involve ordinary people facing confusing danger at sea and choosing wrong. Still, the mystery became larger than the facts. Newspapers loved the story. A ship found abandoned, a missing captain, a vanished crew, no bodies, no explanation. The Mary Celeste entered popular imagination as a ghost ship, and like many ghost stories, it grew. Details changed. Rumors spread. Some versions claimed meals were still warm on the table. Others claimed pipes were still smoking. Some made the disappearance sound more supernatural than the evidence allowed. But the real story does not need those extra details. The real story is already haunting enough. A real ship was found. Real people vanished. And the evidence never gave a final answer. That is what makes the Mary Celeste different from a legend. It is not just a scary tale. It is a historical event with names, dates, cargo, witnesses, and official investigations. And yet, the center of the story remains empty. What did they see? What did they fear? Why did they leave? Those questions still echo across the case. The ocean is very good at hiding answers. On land, evidence can remain. Footprints can harden. Buildings can survive. Objects can be buried and recovered. But at sea, evidence disappears. A lifeboat can vanish beneath waves. A rope can sink. A body can be lost forever. A storm can erase the scene. The Mary Celeste was found, but the people who could explain it were not. That is why the mystery has survived. Not because there are no theories. There are many theories, but because none of them can stand over the others and say, with complete certainty, this is what happened. Maybe it was alcohol fumes. Maybe it was a false belief that the ship was sinking. Maybe it was bad weather. Maybe it was a broken pump. Maybe it was fear. Maybe it was a chain of small problems that became one fatal decision. Or maybe the real answer was something no one has imagined correctly. The Mary Celeste reminds us that history is not always a story of buried ruins and ancient kings. Sometimes history is a quiet deck, a drifting ship, an empty cabin, a missing lifeboat, and 10 people who sailed into the Atlantic and never came back. There is something deeply unsettling about an object left behind without its people. An empty house, an abandoned car, a meal never eaten, a ship with no crew. These things disturb us because they suggest interruption. Something was happening. Then suddenly, it stopped. The Mary Celeste is one of the greatest examples of that feeling. It is not the wreck of a ship that failed. It is the shell of a journey that was never completed. The ship continued moving, but the story of the people on board ended somewhere else, somewhere we cannot see. And maybe that is why the Mary Celeste still matters. Because the mystery is not just what happened to a ship. It is what happens when human certainty meets the sea. Captain Briggs may have believed he was saving everyone. The crew may have believed they were escaping danger. For a few moments, leaving the ship may have seemed like the only reasonable choice. And then perhaps the wind shifted, the rope failed, the ship moved away, and the safer place became unreachable. If that is what happened, then the Mary Celeste is not a story about ghosts. It is a story about fear, and how quickly fear can turn a survivable situation into a tragedy. But we do not know. And that uncertainty is the reason the name still survives. The Mary Celeste was not the largest ship. It was not the most valuable ship. It was not the most important vessel of its time. But it became unforgettable because it left behind a perfect question. Where did they go? More than 150 years later, that question still has no final answer. The ship was eventually recovered. The hearings ended. The theories multiplied. The world moved on. But the empty deck of the Mary Celeste never really disappeared. It became part of maritime memory. A warning, a puzzle, a ghost story without a ghost. And perhaps the most chilling possibility is this. The truth may have been simple. Maybe there was no grand conspiracy, no monster in the fog, no hidden villain, no supernatural force. Maybe it was one frightened decision, one misread danger, one rope that failed, one small boat swallowed by the Atlantic. History often remembers the strange moments because they feel impossible. But sometimes the impossible is only what remains after the evidence is gone. The Mary Celeste is not terrifying because we know what happened. It is terrifying because we almost know. We can see the ship. We can see the missing lifeboat. We can see the cargo left behind. We can see the clues. But we cannot see the final moment. We cannot hear the order to abandon ship. We cannot know what Captain Briggs believed. We cannot know what the crew felt as they climbed into the lifeboat. We cannot know whether they thought they would return. And that missing moment is where the mystery lives. A ship crossed the Atlantic without its people, and the ocean kept the answer. If you enjoy stories about strange discoveries, forgotten mysteries, and events history never fully explained, subscribe to the Curiosity Archive, because some mysteries are not buried underground, some are found drifting at sea, and some still refuse to come home.